My name is Iris Wall, IRISWALL, and I came from the Rowlands, Anna and Alonzo Rowland. That's who the Rowland Canal is named for in Indiantown.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that canal. Will you tell me where it is?
It's, you go out toward, we call it the West Farm Road. You go out by the Indiantown Middle School, and it's that canal that runs right near the Indiantown Middle School.
Okay, what is that family heritage? What type of work did they do and where did they come from?
They were, my grandmother was, they were farmers. They came from Alachua County in near Gainesville. They had come over from Alabama, and in the early 1800s they came down to Fort Meade in Arcadia. They worked in the orange groves there, and then they heard about how you could grow 2 crops a year in on the lake down near Okeechobee. So they went down between, it's at a little old place called Chancey Bay. It's near between between Indiantown and Pahokee, and they were farming there. And I had an uncle that was a range rider, and Warfield had already come to Indiantown in about 1923. He began to come there, and the railroad came through during that time, and he was wanting to make that a turntable, so he'd begun the construction there. And Uncle Frank rode through there to dip the cattle, and he seen all this construction, so he went down and told Grandma and them, said, move on up to Indiantown. Said it's going to really be a boom town. So they packed up and come to Indiantown, and she established a store there. She was a merchant, but he was a farmer. He always farmed and had some cattle too.
Tell us more about Warfield and the railroad and what.
Okay. Well, he had come. The railroad had just come through Indiantown in 1923, and he had envisioned making this the turntable, which was later on made at Wildwood, but he thought it was going to be in Indiantown. And those old tracks are still there. They laid the tracks, and he built the Seminole Inn. He built the depot. He built an old, first he built an old long wooden building. We called it the Big Building there in Indiantown. And in that they had the seaboard offices and the construction, and underneath was a store, a grocery store later on, but in 23 there was no grocery store there. And they moved there, and he had envisioned a great big deal there for the Seaboard Railroad in Indiantown, but then he died shortly after he built the Seminole Inn. Shortly after that was finished, but he built Warfield School, and he built a little row of houses right behind the Seminole Inn there, and that was Indiantown. He built a light plant, and they had a little bit of electricity. We never had electricity in Indiantown until I was 17 years old, 16 years old. And but they had that light plant, and those few little old places up there had a little bit of electricity.
Those that he had built, like the Seminole Inn.
And before that, Sandy, though, they had a wooden schoolhouse. It's ironic that it sit almost in the same place that the Indiantown Middle School is today, an old wooden schoolhouse. And this is where my mother and a few went to school there in that little schoolhouse. But of course, after they built Warfield, well, I started in Warfield.
Isn't that interesting? So that was very close to Bowers Grove.
Yes, and when the Platts came to Indiantown, Uncle Joe Bowers came shortly after they did and planted the Bowers Grove, and the Parkers, which was a real early family there in Indiantown, came with the railroad. They worked with the railroad, and they stayed on, and the Parkers and the Rowells and the Bowers were all related some way or another. Some they either married sisters or something. And of course, there's still some of the Rowells around Stewart today. And once in a while at a funeral, I'll see one of them will come from somewhere else, and I'll get to see them. But they lived there. They built the old station that's it's right on Warfield Boulevard, the old station. It's been a feed store for a while, and now we're going to redo it. But that's the oldest building in Indiantown. That was there. The Parkers built that when they called it the Parkers Garage. Of course, they didn't have they didn't have that many cars, so I don't know. I don't know why, but it's, you know, I can remember as a little teeny girl, it was called Parker's Garage, you know.
And it's the oldest building?
It's the oldest building in
older
Indiantown that's standing.
than the Warfield buildings. That's neat.
We have some plans for it. We have a couple of old houses. It's near the Seminole Inn, but either that or the station, we're gonna make a little museum for Indiantown out of it. We're working on it.
Well, in thinking about the formation of Martin County and the way things were in Indiantown, can you just tell me what you were told growing up about the atmosphere and the plans?
Well, they, like I say, there was a few families there. But Grandma, when she moved in down there, she put in a store. And in that store, she sold everything. That was the only store in Indiantown in 1925. She was the postmistress and when they made Martin County a county. And they told me this, that they were building the St. Lucie Canal, and they were having such a difficult time trying to get materials in there to them, that no roads or nothing, and so they decided that it would be better if they become a county of their own, that they would be able to prosper more. So during that period of time they did. But she had a store down there then, and there was still a big Indian family that lived there called the Tigers, the Tiger clan. And they lived in Indiantown at that time, probably 2 miles down, or a mile and a half down from Grandma's store. And they traded with us. She sold everything that anybody would need, from kerosene to groceries. And if they had, you know, in those days they traded a lot. I've heard her speak many, many times about a family that would nobody had any money, but if they needed something, they would trade something they had for something she had. And so they didn't make a lot of money, but they did a lot of trading for goods, you know, because she carried everything from sewing materials to groceries, everything they needed. Of course, she had no gas because there was nobody had a car, but she had kerosene, sold a lot of kerosene. I guess probably kerosene stoves were beginning to come in at that time, you know.
To replace wooden stoves.
To replace the wood stove, right.
So what was the attitude about the canal that the Indiantown people had?
Well, they always thought Indiantown, it seems like all of my entire life, has been searching for something that's gonna cause a boom there, which there never has been, and frankly, I'm perfectly satisfied with it the size it is, but you know, they always felt like the canal would be a great thing because it would, they would be able to haul things from all the way from Stewart, the coast, all the way to Fort Myers, you know, across the lake, and that's another one of the things I guess that they've done to the lake has been canals and various things that's got it in the condition it's in today. But the lake it's always been a real source of income for people that live around it, you know.
And in what way?
Well, you know, people that they've always fished. You know, they've always made a living. There's always been commercial fishermen that's fished in it. And then there's always been for trade, you know, there's always been people that would come and fish there that would pay to fish, sports fishermen. And two, it's the edge of the canal has always been a wonderful farming area. You know, black gold all around Pahokee and Canal Point and Moorhaven, clean around the lake. It's been a real, and then of course it's wonderful cattle pasture too. You know, they everywhere that the cattle, a lot of people have just taken the pasture that really belongs to the state and have just run their cattle on it, and it's a wonderful cattle pasture, wonderful.
Who was that uncle that told them about the railroad? What was his name? The cattleman. That told your grandmother.
My grandmother. His name was Frank Carpenter. Frank Carpenter, and he was riding for the state at that time. They were dipping the cattle for the ticks, you know, and so he, you know, they still dipped when I was big enough to ride. It lasted way on into the 30s that we dipped the cattle, because I can remember we used to and we didn't know it was poison in those days, and we threw all our dogs in, and they always threatened to throw the kids in.
Oh, dear.
And he's the one that come through there and seen all that construction, and he said, well, you come over to Indiantown. And so Grandma came, and we've stayed through the years. She's been there, I guess, probably she came over in the very early 20s, maybe 1922. Could have been a little earlier than that.
You have this wonderful picture of a school bus and children, and you said that was the whole school. Will you tell us about this picture?
Well, we, of course, Warfield School was a very important part of our lives growing up. You know, I've told you this before, none of us had any money in Indiantown. Nobody had any money. And so at Warfield School, they always had a big Christmas program. And they had Santa Claus come, and I guess they took the money up from the merchants or something. But anyhow, they bought every child in Indiantown a present. So I was very familiar with Warfield School before I ever started to Warfield School, because we went from birth, we went there, and at Christmas time, they always had a big program. And I was always a performer, a little old red-headed thing, and they always got me to say, I can remember saying things, little poems and things before I was ever old enough to go to school. But when I started there, and then, of course, we had no churches in Indiantown, you see, no churches at all. And somebody started a Sunday school at Warfield School, and we would go up to the Sunday school, you know. So everything had a big Halloween carnival. That was always a big event in Indiantown, was the Halloween carnival. And all the kids in town, every single one of us, which wasn't all that many. Nettie, I was discussing with Nettie, trying to figure out how many people she thought might be there. And she said, well, I doubt if there was over 150. So that, you know, that could be true. There was very few of us. We knew every single person, you know, but Warfield School was always a very important part of our life. And then, of course, I started to school there, and I went through the 8th grade there. I thought for a long time that I might have went through the 9th grade there, but I really didn't, because Mig Crane remembers Mrs. Pirtle. She had taught school in Indiantown, and she remembers the day we all came over there in the 9th grade, and Miss Pirtle said, oh, no. So, you know, I guess I went there from the 9th through the 12th there on East Ocean Boulevard.
So you went into Stewart.
When I got big enough. But you see, we only had one school bus. If it run to Port Mayanka and picked up any kids. Now, we walked. We were probably, we were way past Indiantown Middle School. We lived way down that road, and we walked to school all of our life till we began to go to Stewart, you know. And the bus, only one bus, and it carried you to Stewart, carried the kids to Stewart, and then picked up anybody that they had to pick up in Indiantown.
Seems like you'd be awfully late getting home.
No, well, we were, you know, but time didn't really make that much difference to you in those days. We milked, we got up, milked all the cows, fed all the horses, done everything before we ever went to Stewart on the bus, you know. And then when we come home, we'd do the same thing, you know. But those days you worked from before daylight till after dark. That was just a way of life, you know, and we were used to it. Sometimes I hear people say a while back they were having a fit because they had no doctor in Pahokee, had no hospital in Pahokee when they closed down the hospital there. And I said, my goodness, we were raised with, you know, we've never, just in the last very few years have we had any medical facilities in Indiantown. The school nurse gave shots to everybody, every kid that wanted to take them. And Dr. Parker was the only doctor in Martin County. And he would get in his old Model A Ford and chug out to Indiantown. If it was bad enough, he would come, you know. I remember my grandmother had a hemorrhage behind her eye, and we called him, and he drove out there to see about her. And, of course, then the hospital, Martin County Hospital, was just a little old place, you know, before they moved over to the one where they are now.
So, like when you were born, did you have a doctor in attendance?
No. We had there was an old colored woman in Indiantown named Dora, and she assisted my mother in birth. And the only child we had that was born in the hospital was Lamar, our youngest one. Mother came to Stewart then.
Will you go through your siblings? You mentioned Nettie. your family?
She is a cousin. Her mother and my mother were sisters,
Okay.
and they were sisters.
So as far as brothers and sisters, your brothers and sisters?
I'm the oldest in my family, and I have I had 3 sisters and 1 brother. One brother.
And you had a birthday last year, but
70, yes, 70.
but you are just have to depend on stories about the formation of Martin County.
Yes.
Do you have any idea of what grand plans Mr. Warfield had?
Well,
besides, not everybody understands how important that turntable was, but
well, see, that would have been a very important thing because they would have had all the railroad repair would have gone on there. It would have been a big deal had they finished it. But since he died, and the next man that come along didn't have that view, he moved it to Wildwood. But we would have had all the seaboard offices and all the repair garages and all that for the railroad would have been there. It would have some grand plans. You can look today at the Seminole Inn that he built, and they completed it in 1926, and you can see that it was, and for its day, it was a grand place.
And your school too was a very
attractive school, the prettiest school in Martin County for years and years and years. Now they've added on to it and ruined it, but in those days it was built like it was around a fish pond, had a big fish pond out in the middle, and the school went this way all the way around, and they had the girls' bathroom was on that end and the boys' bathroom on this end.
So it had a courtyard.
And had a courtyard. And I remember even when my girls went to school, they would go over and play in the afternoon. It was a good place to play, and in those days it was okay to play over there. And they would go over there, and they'd come running home. They said, "Mama, there's a nest of rattlesnakes at the school." And I run over there, and in the rocks around that pool, there was a whole nest of little rattlesnakes. They were just, about 2 foot long. I mean, there was a lot of them. So we got busy killing the rattlesnakes, and I sent them to get Uncle Reese over at his station, and he come, and finally we killed the big one and a bunch of little ones.
Right in the courtyard.
Right in the courtyard of the school.
What year would have this been? Were you with
Well,
Kyle?
it would have probably been probably in 59.
So pretty recently.
Yeah, not too long ago. That's true. That's before they started the construction on it, and they've built kind of around it and closed it in. I went there last week to speak to the 4th grade, and I could have fainted. They said they have 800 children in Warfield School now.
Goodness.
It looks like the United Nations. They're just all, but it's a nice school, and it was nice and clean. I was very impressed with the, with the atmosphere there, and I was just really impressed with it. It was nice.
You meant the children would look like
Yeah,
the United
the children
Nations.
look like the United Nations. That's right. Every race and nationality. Yes, they were. They were marvelous, though. I enjoyed them so much.
It's great. Do you think it would have been better for Indiantown if the turntable had been there, or do you think?
Well, I'm not a person, I think the perfect plan. I think it's been perfect. It's been a great place to grow up. I have a little story I want to tell you that Nettie told me when I was she said that when the 28 hurricane come through, it blew my grandma's store down. And Nettie said that they had just dug the Roland Canal. And she said they had a big pile of dirt, which was the bank kind of it there. And she said that they come home from Tampa when the hurricane. It was amazing to me that wherever they lived, wherever the Rolands lived, they came home to Indiantown when the hurricane came. They come from Clewiston, they came from Tampa, wherever they lived, they come home and stayed. And so Nettie said that they were worried that it was they had 2 Model A's, and they were brand new, and they were afraid that it was going to blow them off, so they just dug a big hole in that bank of that canal and stuck them cars in there and covered them over with dirt.
Really?
So, but it did blow down my grandmother's store in that day. Blew it down, completely down. But when even is we were talking about the Jupiter Road to West Palm Beach in 1950. Terry was born in 1950, and I drove that road to West Palm Beach then. And Dr. Rozier was the only doctor in West Palm Beach at that time. And so every baby that's born before 1950, Dr. Rozier is like Dr. Parker and Stewart. They always delivered them.
My goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Now that road originally, going from Jupiter, between Jupiter and Indiantown, before there was a bridge, how did it get over the canal?
They just had little old timbers laying, just little old pieces of boards laying across the gullies, and you just,
and
if
the
it was
bridges
wet,
on the road. But what about the canal? Was there a ferry?
no, at that, well, of course, there was a ferry before, but see, when they built that first bridge in Indiantown sometime in the 30s, and then, of course, they had no use for the ferry anymore. But no, everybody that come, I can remember once they worked on that bridge after they had built the first bridge, not the big high bridge that's there now, but the first bridge, and they were working on the floor of it. And I was, we went to town we went to Stewart maybe once every 2 weeks. We'd go to Stewart and buy our staple groceries and stuff like that. So they were working down there underneath the bridge, and they tore the floor out, and they just had 2 timbers laying. And I can remember that my kids would scream and hold their head down like that, but we had to drive across that.
Good.
It would be unheard of today. It would be unheard of today, but in those days it was just...
Nobody fell in.
Nobody fell in. Nobody fell in. We knew how to drive across gullies, I guess.
At Stewart Heritage, the founder of Indiantown, we think of Mr.
Platt.
Francis Marion
Platt.
And you told the story of how he came to Indiantown, and I verified it with the book you referred me to, done by a scholar. So will you tell that again, because it's surprising?
In the late 1800s, they had open range, and they just would build a cow pen, and then everybody would drive their cattle in there, and they'd mark and brand and do what they had to do. But nobody had just a set of cow pens of their own. They was just big old cow pens. So Mr. Marion Platt and a bunch of men met there to work that day, and they got to drinking, and they got to arguing. Him and another fellow got to arguing. And so they finally got a hold of him, and they said, "Oh, it's not worth fighting over. Let's just go." So they left, and the next day they went to another cow pen, and was working there. And when they did, this guy showed up again, and when he did, Marion Platt shot him and killed him. And he run home because it was a while before they could get the law out there. So he run home and got his things, and he moved to a hammock outside of Arcadia. And when the sheriff finally come to his house, they asked Miss Annie Platt, they said, where's your husband? And she said, well, he said he was going to California. And so he lived out there in that hammock for about a year, and the Parkers brothers fed him, and took him his supplies, and today it's still known as California Hammock. But anyway, he decided that he would go down to Cuba. So he went over to Fort Myers and caught a cattle boat and went to Cuba. And he stayed for a while. And he said, well, I'm just going to go home and face the music. He missed his wife and missed his children. So he went back to Arcadia, and that was the very first trial they had in the Arcadia courthouse. And of course they pronounced him innocent. This one had gone, that one gone. So they pronounced him innocent. When he did, he gathered up everything he had, took a few orange trees from a grove there, and gathered up everything he had, and he struck out, and he settled in Indiantown. And of course he was still alive when I was big enough to know him, Grandpa Platt.
I didn't know that.
Yes, he was. And when we had to come home to Indiantown a few years ago, some of his children's children, or some came, I think it must have been his children, came to Indiantown, and she was an old lady, and she and I were talking, and she said, oh, Iris, she said, I can remember when your grandpa and them come into Arcadia. She said, I thought your Uncle Iry was the handsomest man alive. And so, it felt good to me to communicate with somebody that had known him, in those days.
How nice, how nice. And his wife's name was?
Annie.
And that was the original name?
That was the original name of Indiantown.
And they were the original postmaster?
Yes, he did. The very first little post office, he had it, of course. And you know, Roy Rood from Fort Pierce, the Roods have been down there forever. His mother, in Jupiter, his mother was the oldest school teacher at one time in Palm Beach County. And but he said that he used to walk to Indiantown and carry the mail with his brother, whose name was Homer Rood, and they would carry the mail. They would walk from Jupiter to Indiantown with the mail.
Imagine.
Can you imagine?
And then the road to Stewart was called, before it became Indiantown, it was the Stewart Annie Road, right?
Right. And they hacked that out now. Him and his boys, Grandpa Platt and his boys, hacked that road out with axes at first, so they would have access. And then later on, he moved to Indiantown. I mean, he moved to Stewart. But the very first road that they had there, he hacked it out with axes.
Isn't that something?
It was something.
Thank you for sharing that. You have this little book from Betty Mae Jumper. Will you tell me why you have it and the connection? Well,
her family was one of the families that lived in Indiantown. They were the last ones, the last Indians to leave there that had lived there for a long time. And her mother's name was Ada Tiger. And she had two brothers, and one of them was killed. DeSoto Tiger was killed with the Ashley gang with a load of furs, and the other brother died of pneumonia. And so that just left Annie with these two small children and some cousins and various ones that was there. So her uncle came down from the reservation, and he said, we want you to move to the reservation. So they gathered up their stuff and moved. But during that time, before even then, in that age, now they must have moved, let's see, I would have said they probably moved before the storm. They probably moved in 1927. They moved down to the reservation. But she gave me that book. She was the first educated Seminole there was. And she said that she grew up and she couldn't go to school with the blacks because she was not black. She couldn't go to school with the whites because she was an Indian. And she said they had no school. They had no schooling at all. And she said her mother made arrangements for her to go to Cherokee, North Carolina. And she and Howard, her brother's name was Howard, went to Cherokee, North Carolina and went to school. And she went on to college. And from that, and she wrote this book about a Indian family that came from Oklahoma, and he was a preacher, and he wanted to help the Indians. He wanted to bring the story of Christ to the Indians, and it took them 3 days to come from Stewart to Indiantown.
By ox cart.
By ox cart. And I told her, she told me when she was there in Indiantown, she was talking about that her mother, they had a lot of wild hogs, and she said there's somewhere they loaded them on a train. And I said, I know exactly what you did, Betty. You come across, there was an old place there, an old ford there before Mr. Troop cleared that land to make those orange groves. There was an old ford there called Tiger Ford. And what they did, that's where they crossed. And they went over that old wooden Palm City Bridge and up to the Stewart Feed Store, and that's where they loaded them on the train. Isn't that something? And she could remember, as a young child, she could remember taking those hogs, but she never could figure out how in the world they got there, how in the world they got to Stewart. But that's what they did. That's how they did. They went through Tiger Ford and up through Palm City and across that old wooden bridge, because she remembered going across an old wooden bridge.
Isn't that interesting?
And that's exactly how they did.
With those family names, it's so difficult, but Tom Tiger and Tom Tiger Hammock is something I hear a lot. Is there a connection between that?
Well,
Tiger
he was her brother, I think. I think Tom Tiger was Ada Tiger's brother, and or maybe he was her father. Yeah, probably her father, because she only had the two brothers. It was Ada and the two brothers, but. I'm sure that it was from the Tigers because, they've been a clan.
Would that fit in if he died in 1907?
Yes, it would have.
It would still, that's the
yes,
right time?
It would have.
So,
it would have. She would have been, you know, probably in 1907. He died in 1907. Well, I don't know. I'll ask her. I'll ask her.
It doesn't pass on to the father.
I'll
It's
ask her.
confusing
I'll
those
ask her.
names.
I'll
Okay.
ask her.
Oh, well, thank you. You mentioned Mr. Troop, and so that is such an important era of the rodeo and all. So can you tell us about him? And
Well, they came first. They were a construction company. Troop Brothers were a construction company down in Miami, and they came up there and they bought a lot of that seaboard land, a lot of Seaboard Railroad land, and they bought it probably for the taxes in those days. It was the early 40s, and he, Mr. Troop, first his brother come, E.K. Troop, and he couldn't get along with the people in Indiantown. They just fussed and fussed and fussed and fussed, never could get along. So they sent this younger brother who was G.C. Troop, and I can remember that we took him, me and Homer, took him to the very first rodeo he ever went to in his life. We took him to Davie, and to a little old rodeo they had in Davie, and he just loved it. And from that come the Circle T Rodeo, you know. And he, the first year, I think I was probably 15, the first rodeo they had, and I can remember that they barbecued all night long. I'd get on my horse and ride down there for a while, and then I'd ride home and sleep a little while and get up and ride back down there. And they
Still cooking.
Yeah, still cooking. And they built, put these big old, dug these big old pits in the ground, and then they put bed springs over them and laid those cows on the great big hunks of meat. And they had a big barbecue, and I can remember me and my sister June rode a bull. I can remember that the first year that they had the rodeo there.
so if you were 17, help me with the year.
Probably, or let's see, I could have been 15 to 17. I could have been any of those years. Let's see, it would have been probably 50. No, it would have had to been in the 40s because it was long. I married in 1948. I would say it was probably 46, maybe.
So they
somewhere
started
like
that long ago, but of course he didn't have that big country.
No, he didn't. No, he built
So-
that later, see.
so
He
it
just had the little old teeny arena down there on Big Mound first. Had that for many years there.
Is that a different location?
Yeah, that's a different location. And
So
then,
now there are houses and all at Big
Yeah,
Mound?
yes,
Okay, so
yes,
that he
yes.
had a little rodeo stand.
Right,
But don't
but-
you have to have fences and chutes? And
well, they had fences and chutes. They had down where he had the old rodeo arena, the Family Worship Center's right there. That was his house. That was Mr. Troop's house. That two-story building there where the Family Worship Center is. We owned that land in there, bought that land in there, and it was right there behind that's where they had it. And it had fences and chutes and things, but it wasn't near as fancy as the big one. Then he got bigger and bigger and bigger, you know, through
and
the
then,
years.
I mean, he dressed up in
Oh yes,
shiny clothes.
yes,
and
yes.
So
yes.
he-
and
he
rode
really-
right out at the opening of the.
He really didn't have that heritage. He just learned
No,
it from you
no,
guys.
he did. He did. No, he was a construction man, but he loved the rodeo and loved that type of life. And
That was good for Indiantown,
yes, it was
wasn't
very good for Indiantown, and I loved Mr. Troop all of his life. He was a marvelous man. Never done anything but good things for Indiantown. Never. He was I can remember when before Terry was born, Homer would buck out these horses for him. He'd just buy a whole bunch of bucking horses, and if they throwed Homer, he'd give him $5, and if he rode them, he gave him 10. And that's how he got his bucking stock, you know, for his rodeo. But a few months ago, I rode across in the Cracker Trail right across the state, and I met this old boy, and he said, you know, Iris, the last time I seen Homer, we was bucking out them horses at Troops. I said, well, that's been 50 years ago.
Now, you know, to someone who's not in that world, I mean, bucking horses,
Yeah.
bucking. Will you explain all that? I mean,
Well-
were they horses that were wild?
Yes, they were. Some horses you can't tame; they're just buckers, and they get a reputation for that. Sometimes you just get a horse that he just will not break, and that's what they use for the rodeo. Bucking, they call them bucking string of horses, and he would just buy a whole group of them, see, and if they were wild enough that they throwed Homer, you know, he would give him $5. But if he could ride them, he didn't keep them. Mr. Troop didn't keep them, so he'd give him $10. And he used to do this a lot for him when later on.
Didn't he get hurt? Didn't he?
No, you can get bucked off. It doesn't. Once in a while you get hurt. That's true. That comes along with it. But it's just something you like, Sandy, or you don't.
Did you ever do that?
Oh, yes. We've ridden every kind of thing.
So someone that has a lot of horses and deals in horses, they say, well, put that one over there. He's a bucker. And then isn't it just awful to load them and get them to
Well, yeah, they are hard to load sometimes, but you can get them loaded. And after a while, bucking becomes a profession to them. You can load them right up anywhere. They'll just hit the chute and go right in there. But they're sometimes, you know, that you can never break them. They just wild all their life. They're just a bucker, that's all.
Are there people like this?
Yes, there's people like that. Yeah, there's people like that. I always tell somebody, I said, well, you know, I'm only a certain amount civilized, and that's all. All I can be.
So,
of course, I love the country and love this type of work. You know.
I heard you talk about all your businesses and how you could live anywhere. Will you elaborate on that? And then also tell us a little bit about the love of your life, because that's a nice story.
Well, you know, I met Homer in the 6th grade. I probably knew him before, but I fell in love with him in the 6th grade, we'll put it like that. And we were in a play in Warfield School called Aunt Drusilla's Garden, and I was Aunt Drusilla and he was the gardener. And I loved him all my whole entire life. And we fought a lot and argued a lot when we were growing up. I remember that when we married the summer we got out of school, and we went back to see Ms. Roth, and she said, oh, cowboy, said, I can't believe you all are going to get married. Said, now you must not pay any attention to anything she says. And she said to me, she said, he just aggravates you, don't pay any attention to him. But she said many years later, we had a reunion, and she said, Iris, I believe you had the best marriage I've ever seen. It was a lifetime love affair. But we started with absolutely nothing, and we just, he was a man that he loved people, you know. Somebody said that most people love money and use people, but he was a man that loved people and used money, and he was very unique. Those that know him know he was very unique. But we were married 47 years, and we raised 3 daughters, and we have 5 lumber yards, and we have some cattle and many things. And as God has blessed us with these things, we've shared them with Indiantown. We've always been a very generous people, you know. But he was a man that I just absolutely, I admired him. We were the best of friends, and it was just a lifetime love affair. I didn't think I could live without him, but you know, somehow or another, each day I've received enough strength for that day, and I know that some people, you know, just have a lifetime relationship, and that's the way we were.
How fortunate. And you were saying that you could go live in Palm Beach, maybe, or Deidre Island.
Yeah, when the girl.
How would that work?
Yeah, when the girl came to interview me, she said, well, Ms. Wall, she and I went out to our cow camp, you know, and she said, well, Ms. Wall, she said, you could live anywhere you want to. And I said, well, Sally, I do. That's what you don't understand. I live just where I want to. I love Indiantown, and I do just what I want to do. And they all laugh about me taking care of the cattle now, you know, but it's just something that all those years that I raised my children, I stayed at home and raised my children. But I always cow hunted when we worked our cattle. I always cow hunted. But when Homer passed away, I just it seemed like then I just sort of took his place in the cattle deal, and the kids have settled down in the lumber yards, but I still take care of the cattle. Still take care of them.
Somehow the Pollock is not in your family.
No, I married, my mother married a Pollock. See, we were Rowlands.
Okay.
That's where all of us were Rowlands.
So
but
her
my
second
mother,
husband, maybe?
no, my mother married a Pollock. See, my name was Pollock. before.
Okay.
But Roland was our original name in Indiantown.
I'm confused. You're going to have to help me.
Okay.
Okay.
My grandmother was a Roland,
Okay.
and my mother married a Pollock.
Okay. So,
Uh-huh. So I was a Pollock, you know.
Okay.
And then I married a Wall.
Now, weren't those Pollocks real, true cattle hunters?
Yes, they were. They're cowmen.
Okay, will you tell me, just talk about, you talked about before the cattle were fenced in, but since we have you here, and what the cattle business was like in the early days, through the centuries even. I mean, because I know you're a student of your heritage.
Well, the cattle industry has never been a real, you know, people are rich in cattle. That might not mean they have any money, but they're rich in cattle. But during the early times, now when they sold the cattle, they got rich, but they were not people that used that riches that much. You know, they put it under the bed in a box or it never meant that much to them. You know, they never changed their lifestyle. I'll tell you the truth, Sandy, you can get a multimillionaire and a cow hunter in the same room, and it'd be hard for you to tell one from the other, you know, that doesn't have a dime. That's just the way they are. And that's the main money they made in those days. You know, they made some money in those days. And then our industry was plagued with screwworms, you know, for years. Every calf that was born, you had to doctor. And then the University of Florida got wise and sent out a sterile fly, and when they did, it wiped out the screwworms. But then now cattle are up a little bit today, but there's times that cattle, that you have to be, if you're in the cattle business, you have to be in it because you love it. It's not the money you make in it. It's a way of life that you like. And I've been out there, you know, I get to thinking about old men that I cow hunted with when we had this 70th birthday party. Some of them I had not seen in 50 years, more than 50 years. And I said it was everybody's birthday party because they just had we had such a good time getting to see each other, you know, and talk to each other. But they liked the cattlemen liked the wide open spaces, and they liked the freedom of being their own boss. And everybody's their own boss, whether they work, but the day when you're a cowman, you're your own boss, you know, when you're a cattle person or a cowboy, you just, you're your own boss to a certain degree. And they like that, and they like to be out, and they like the cattle, and they like a simple life. You know, many times, Homer said, oh, we ought to move over on the water. And we'd go over there and look, you know. And I said, oh, let's go home, honey. He said, that's right, let's go home. But the cattle business is something that through the years, we've done it because we loved it. It wasn't for the money we had in it, or made out of it, or nothing like that. In fact, we couldn't make a living at it. That's why we got lumber yards and various things to make a living. But we just did it because we loved it. You know, it become a way of life for us. And my children, every one of them is the same way today. It doesn't matter where they work or what they do. They come home when we work the cattle. They like to work the cattle, you know. It's just it's a way of life. It's what it is. It's not the money that's in it. It's just the lifestyle that we live.
So when you were talking about the two men in the room and one was a millionaire and one was a cow, you mean in that industry it would be a big ranch owner, that he won't change his lifestyle from when maybe he started as just a
That's right, a cowboy. That's
hand.
right. You can never tell the difference because they're not persons that that's what they love. They love this simple lifestyle. And it doesn't really make any difference how much money they have. They never change that lifestyle. They always have the same lifestyle. Now, they might put in running water or lights, but as far as really, you know, luxury, they're not too much for it. They're just very simple, plain people.
Now, Aldo Adams, and talking about the stewardship of the land, are you working your land that way to eradicate the...
Yes. Actually, I think ranchers are the best environmentalists in the world because it's to their advantage to take care of what they have. It's to their advantage. But, you know, there is so many rules today till I cannot get used to them myself. I cannot get used to all the rules that we have, even in Martin County. I cannot get used to them. When I had a flood, we had a flood a serious flood, and my dike broke. And it was on Saturday morning. And I did everything in the world. I couldn't get, you can't get anybody on Saturday morning. So I called these guys, and they began to fill up my dike, to patch it. And so when he had one more load of dirt to put in that dike, the county man comes up and he tells me, he said, don't dump any more dirt. I said, I'm going to dump that last load of dirt. He said, no, I'm stopping you now. I said, I don't care what you do. I'm dumping that last load of dirt. And I dumped the last load of dirt. Well, he gave me a citation. And so I called him and I said, now, what can I do to make this right? What can I do to make this right? And he said, well, you can remove the dirt. I said, it scares me to think that we have, that you would think of this solution. It pure scares me to think that you would think of this solution. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. So finally they fined me $1,000. And what they fined me for was hauling dirt over a county road without a permit. I just can't get used to it, Sandy. I want, but as far as taking care of the land, there is nobody in the world that wants to. I do not let my family kill anything. They kill, when I had our deer analyzed and they said that we need to kill off some does, then I let them kill a doe apiece. But I take care of my land and take care of, it is my desire to keep the land. I wouldn't know what in the world we'd do without it. So I am a very strong environmentalist. And I got a middle kid, the one that runs the Seminole Inn, that is a pure environmentalist. And she keeps me posted on what to do and and what's the best thing to do. But I certainly want to. I think I think the rancher is being exploited many times. I think, the real solution should be for every man to take care of his waste on his own land. But that's not being done. It's only a few people that are doing that. Now, as far as I'm concerned on my ranch, this land that I lease there, I've been leasing it 28 years. And all the water from everybody comes down on me. But I have no place to put the water. So you see, there's some serious problems there. And but I am an environmentalist, I will tell you that. I'm a real environmentalist.
And I know that's true. Is there anything we should cover that I haven't thought to encourage you to talk about? I know that they have those tours through the Seminole Inn to go to Barley Barber Swamp. Should anything be said about Florida Power and Light or anything?
That is a very generous thing they do there. They preserve this old swamp, and it is absolutely beautiful. One of the biggest cypress swamps, I guess, probably in the state. It is really a beautiful place, and it's absolutely free to the public. They can go. They have these tours. They pay a guide, and they book them out of the Seminole Inn. But that's the only private partnership that Florida Power and Light has anywhere. And and Johnny takes care of it for them, and they take them out, and you can enjoy seeing a big old cypress swamp, and they have a walkway through it, and it's a very nice tour, and I think Florida Power and Light are to be commended for saving it, because many times things are destroyed that you can't ever bring back, and it is a beautiful old swamp, and I know that anybody that would go would really, really enjoy it.
It is really wonderful, and it's just there if somebody will make the arrangements
That's
and
right.
go.
That's all they have to do.
It
doesn't cost a thing.
Anything else?
No, that's all I can think of. We got some mighty fine folks in Indiantown, and I do really believe that Indiantown now is beginning to do a few things that's really going to be helpful in the whole county. We have, with the Bechtel property we have a very fine young man that's head of the chamber now, Andy, that works for VIA, a big French-based company that has an orange grove in Indiantown. And I think that Indiantown is getting some really nice things. I know Bechtel put $1 million in savings for Indiantown, and they use the interest off that to, you know, help the youth and to do things that's nice for Indiantown. In the center of town, they have a beautification committee, and they've done marvelous things. It's looking better and better, Sandy, better and better.
You've talked about your husband Homer and his generosity. Since you're here, would you just talk about Timer and about Bill Owens, just a little bit about them?
When, well, of course, I can remember Timer from the time he come to Indiantown. I always loved him. Long before he married Kitty or any of his family was born, we knew him and always loved him. And he was always a public-minded person, and he was always a person that, you know, that wanted to preserve the environment. And he was a great friend to the Seminole Indians. He was just a great, everyday type person. I always loved Timer. And Billy, his daddy, when Mr. Owens first bought that old grove, me and June were just kids then, and he had the raggediest fence I ever seen in my life, and every single week his cattle would get out when he was down in West Palm Beach. He was a tax assessor or collector or something down there in West Palm. And he would come out there, and every Saturday morning he'd come out in our yard and blow his horn. And he'd say, "Kids, will you come drive up my cattle?" And we'd go drive up his cattle. And then when Billy got out of college, well, he began to come, you know, and of course, one thing about Indiantown, you always feel like you're kin to everybody, you know, and that's the way we felt about Bill Owens. You know, he was just a part of us, and he was a great speaker. You know, he was a very good public speaker, and he always loved Indiantown and always promoted it. Him and Timer both through the years. Now they were men that went. He went on to Tallahassee, and Timer was a lot. Now Homer was a person that he never got very far from Indiantown. You know, he was more of a home person, but the three men always promoted Indiantown, and I felt very close to them. We had a great loss when we lost Timer and Bill Owens and Homer in Indiantown, in my opinion.
Of course.
Kind of the father of Indiantown, really.
Thank you.
You're welcome.